Because we're entering a 4-week sermon series about goodness, I wanted to start with a story of goodness that I experienced in my life. And the one that came to mind most readily was how my father helped me out the day that my mother died back in 2016. Now, for context, I've never known a time in my life when my biological parents didn't hate each other. And yet, when I called my father from New York, having just flown there from Colorado, exhausted and knowing that mom was on her last day or so, she wasn't lucid, I couldn't interact with her. But knowing that this was coming, I called dad and asked him to come down from upstate New York, where he lived, to help me out. And he didn't hesitate. He drove almost an hour to the train. He took almost 3 hours worth of trains to get into New York City. He took a cab to the hospital, and there I greeted him by telling him that I wanted to go see my mother one more time in hospice before she passed, and I wanted him to come with me. And I'm sure there's very little in his life he's ever wanted to do less than that. And yet, amazingly, he was willing to do it. So the two of us went together, looked at my mother one last time while she was alive. And then we went back to my mother's apartment where I was staying through this. Now, my mother had been in the hospital for about a week before her condition became known and her impending death became known. And my mother was a crazy cat lady. And so no one had been in the house for a week. And so the little New York apartment absolutely stank of cat pee. And this was not fun for either my father or I. But he insisted that I sleep in my mother's bedroom because it stank a little bit less than the living room, where he made do with a couch because there were no other places to sleep in the house. So he got very little sleep, and I at least got some sleep to help with the challenges of the next day. And really, it is one of the most incredible acts of goodness I could come up with to get us thinking about goodness. So, what do we mean by goodness? We could mean a lot of things. But here, when I think about human goodness, I think about inherent human goodness, inherent worth, inherent value. We might talk about inherent human dignity. And we start today with our Genesis 1 creation story, which we've taken a couple of excerpts from. The idea that we are made in God's image and that we are, as the Message version puts it, so very good. What a wonderful way to think about humanity, that we are so very good. And I translate that into our time to mean, again, that humans have inherent goodness, inherent worth, inherent value, inherent dignity, that there is something of a divine spark that we have in us. The Catholic priest turned Episcopal priest Matthew Fox used to write about original blessing. He actually has a book by that name in which he argues that we shouldn't think of humanity as emerging from original sin, that most primordially, we actually come from original blessing, even in the creation stories. So I was thinking about the idea of original blessing as a way of understanding human goodness, and being the nerd that I am, I decided to look up definitions of blessing. And I found two that work interestingly well together and relate to us well today. So a blessing is a beneficial thing for which one is grateful, and it's also something that brings well-being. If you've been in our congregation long enough, you know that for a while we actually had a closing song that began, "As you have been blessed, now go be a blessing." And this is a lyric I wrote based on the idea that we were originally blessed by God in some sense, and we were originally conceived to be a blessing in the world. And so what we ought to do in response is to be grateful for the blessings we experience in our lives. And then we ought to act in ways that will bring well-being to the world, because that's what it means to be a blessing. We were made to bless and be blessed. We were made to experience well-being and help other people experience it as well. And at this point, we begin to get to the connection between the idea of our inherent goodness and then the matter of the ethical goodness to which we are invited in our time and place. If our inherent goodness is our worthiness or our dignity or our value, then ethical goodness is whatever we contribute to the world that helps us experience that well-being that we were meant for and that minimizes our avoidable suffering. And so, if we want to know how to be ethically good in the world, the simplest answer is by helping ourselves and other people flourish more and suffer less. The Vista Grande vision statement from 2020 actually begins along these lines. The first line in it is, "We covenant together to imagine and live into a world where God's kingdom vision of human and planetary flourishing comes to pass through the work of love, justice, peace, equality, and extravagant hospitality." So here at Vista Grande, we're already about being grateful for our blessings and working to bless other people. And that point takes us from Genesis 1 to Matthew chapter 5, part of the Sermon on the Mount. And this passage I've picked, it's extremely well known, salt of the earth, light of the world, city on a hill. But it kind of blends both our inherent goodness and the ethical goodness to which we are invited. I elected to go with the Message version of this passage because I honestly think it's creative and wonderful and right on in helping us understand what it means to be good in the world. So, as a reminder, this passage begins that we are salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of the earth. Now, I do not cook or bake at all, ever. However, I have watched every episode of the Great British Baking Show approximately a bajillion times. That is a word I just made up, but it's true. And so even I, who do not cook or bake, know that there are two different ways we can use salt in our cooking or baking. If we want something to taste salty, we can use more salt and we will absolutely taste it. But the trick is, if you use salt in small amounts, a pinch or a little bit, however you define a small amount, what the salt will do in that case is it will enhance the existing flavors of the other ingredients. So the salt brings out the flavors that are already there. And in this sense, we can be salt seasoning that brings out the goodness that's already out there. We can enhance that goodness. So our small offerings of, to go back to our vision statement, love, justice, peace, equality, and extravagant hospitality, enhance flourishing in the world because we season the world with our little offerings of blessing. And that expands the love a little bit, makes the love that's already out there a little richer, a little tastier, a little more complex, a little more nuanced, maybe. And so in that sense, we enhance or expand or improve the taste of the good things that are already out there. But there is another use of salt. Jesus does not refer to it in this passage, but he certainly would have known about it in his time and place when they did not have refrigerators. Salt was used as a preservative so that any food that might spoil, any perishable food, could be sustained and preserved a little bit longer if it was salted. It would spoil less slowly. It would be edible and safe longer, and it would taste a little better with the salt. The taste wouldn't go. So in this sense, we are also invited to be preservatives as salt. We are invited to preserve what is good in the world, which means preserving human dignity, value, worth, and goodness, which we often do in our work for justice. Because human dignity, value, worth, and goodness may be inherent, but nonetheless, they can be completely ignored by societies that mistreat people, treat some people cruelly, treat people unequally, and thereby ignore that inherent dignity, value, worth, and goodness of some people because of the way inequality works. So when we work against inequality and for justice, we are acting as salt-like preservatives, trying to preserve that human goodness and prevent some of the suffering that goes with inequality. Then, of course, Jesus moves to his metaphor of light. We are light, the Message version says, bringing out the God colors of the world. We illuminate goodness in order to better experience and celebrate it. So the God colors in the world are already in the world. There's already goodness and joy and gratitude and people taking good care of each other. And light doesn't bring the color, but light illuminates the color. It shines on the color and makes the color more visible. And so in this sense, we add to human goodness by making it more apparent to people as light, bringing out the God colors of the world. Unfortunately, that's not the only way in which we need to be light. Some of you may remember the Washington Post slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." And whatever you think of what's happened to the Washington Post slogan in recent years, and however unfortunate it is to use the word darkness to mean badness because there's some linguistic racism in that, I think nonetheless the impulse behind the slogan "Democracy dies in darkness" is unfortunately really true. Good things can be stripped away and evil can be done when we are not able to see that it's happening, when it happens behind closed doors or in Congress at 3 in the morning or in other ways where we don't have access to it. And so part of what we need to illuminate as light is not just human goodness, but is also human evil, human cruelty, human harm. When we illuminate these things, we are better able to work against the cruelty and the evil and the harm because we are more aware of it. We understand how it works, and thus we learn how to struggle against it. And finally, Jesus lifts up this idea of being a city on a hill. And as a city on a hill, we serve as a public witness to God's goodness and our own goodness, our own God-given goodness, if you will. When we share our goodness with others, when we take that inherent goodness and turn it into ethical goodness, serving the world in joy and gratitude, expanding equality and justice, loving people, and so on, we aren't merely sharing our own goodness with people, we are sharing God's goodness with them. And we are inviting them into relationship with God, however they may understand God. One last point before we begin to wrap this up. In a few minutes, we're going to sing "This Little Light of Mine." And I love that song, but it is also true that it is very individualistic. It's very much the light of mine, and I'm going to let it shine, and very much about an individual person. But we know that our lights shine brighter when we shine them together. And so one reason we come here every week, we certainly do come here to learn and grow, to be in community with one another, to support one another, to get support when we are in need of it. All of that is absolutely true. We come here to worship, to praise, and so on. But we also come here to learn how to shine our lights collectively. We learn how to make a difference in the world communally, because those lights shine brighter when we focus them all in the same direction and shine them at the same time. So we may sing "This Little Light of Mine," but really what we're doing here is shining this little light or these little lights of ours. I end every week with some questions for the week and a prayer for us all. The reason for the questions for the week, for anyone who may be seeing this for the first time, is that I don't want you to leave worship today or leave watching this video and think, okay, I can check that off my list. I've done that now, and get on to my next thing and forget about it until next Sunday or whenever you next interact with our congregation. My hope is that worship at this church is something that you take with you into the week and something that informs your week. And so these are questions that I mean for you to carry with you and think about on Monday and maybe even Wednesday and maybe even Friday. Questions that can work on you a little bit and make you think a little bit, maybe even haunt you a little bit, as I like to say. There are quite a few of these questions today, so here goes. How would your life change if you understood yourself to be so very good? If you understood yourself to have emerged from original blessing rather than original sin? What does it mean to be blessed, to be a blessing? If flourishing is about living in wholeness, wellness, joy, and gratitude, how can you help yourself flourish? How can you help others flourish? As salt, how can you enhance the world's goodness? How can you preserve humanity and protect it from harm? And since we just passed Earth Day, how can you preserve our precious planet and protect that from harm? How can you let your light shine? How can you join with others to shine an even brighter light? And finally, how can your life be like a city on a hill, advertising holy goodness and publicizing human goodness and lifting up human flourishing. Finally, here is a prayer for us all. I call it that because, as I say every week, I am in need of this prayer as much as anyone else at worship or anyone else who may be watching this video at any time. May we recognize our very goodness, our inherent worth and dignity and value. May we recognize the very goodness, inherent worth and dignity and value of all other people as part of God's original blessing and as the demand to work for a world of well-being. May we be salty, stay lit, and be that city on a hill so that others will come to open up with God, our generous parent in heaven. Amen.